The sun had barely risen over the dry Arizona desert, but the heat was already pressing down like a heavy hand. Dust moved slowly across the streets, carried by a restless wind. Wooden buildings stood unevenly along the road, worn by time and neglect. This was Tombstone in the 1800s, a town built on survival. But behind the stories of gunfights and outlaws, there was another reality. People were hungry, not the kind of hunger we know today, but a deep, constant hunger that never really went away. In Tombstone, food wasn't about taste, it was about staying alive. By mid-morning, the saloon doors creaked open. Cowboys, miners, and drifters walked inside, looking for something to eat or something to forget their troubles. Inside, the air was thick with smoke, sweat, and the smell of cooked beans. There were no menus, no chefs, just simple food made to fill the stomach. On a rough table, you might find a tin plate of beans, soft, overcooked, sometimes burnt, often mixed with grease or salt pork. It didn't look good, it didn't taste good, but it kept you going. Next to it, a piece of bread, hard, dry, sometimes so tough it had to be dipped in coffee just to chew. And if you were lucky, a slice of salt pork, preserved with salt to survive the desert heat, greasy, heavy, but full of energy. In a place like Tombstone, that was enough. Nobody talked about the food. They talked about money, fights, and luck. Because food was never the main experience. It was just survival. But there was one thing people depended on: coffee. In the corner, a blackened pot boiled over a fire. Inside it, thick, dark coffee. Grounds thrown straight into water, boiled again and again, sometimes reused for days. Bitter, strong, harsh. But it worked. It kept men awake and alive. Step outside, and the truth became even clearer. Food was hard to find. There were no stores, no easy supplies. Everything had to travel long distances, through heat, dust, and danger. Fresh vegetables were rare. Fruit was almost impossible to get. Meat spoiled quickly, unless it was preserved. That's why people relied on the same things every day: beans, flour, salted meat, coffee. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. If you had money, though, there was another option. Boarding houses, simple places where people could eat real meals and sit together. Inside there was structure, warmth, a sense of normal life. Here you might get a proper stew, a pot filled with beef, potatoes, maybe some vegetables if they were available, cooked slowly over fire, turning into something warm and satisfying. Not perfect, but better. Bread here was different too. Soft, fresh, warm. For a moment, it reminded people of home, and for a short time, sitting at that table, life felt normal again. People talked quietly, they ate slowly, they felt human, but not everyone could afford it. And when the money ran out, it was back to the saloon, back to beans, back to survival. Because in Tombstone, food wasn't about living well. It was about not dying. Every meal was a necessity. Every bite, a way to keep going. As the sun set over the town, shadows stretched across the streets. Inside the saloons and boarding houses, lamps began to glow. And once again, people sat down to eat the same food. Beans. The night fell over Tombstone, and with it came a different kind of hunger. Not the hunger of the stomach, but the hunger of life itself. The streets were quiet now, dust settling in the corners, broken wagon wheels and footprints fading into the dark. Inside the saloon, a few men lingered, nursing their last sips of bitter coffee, staring into the shadows as if the walls might answer them back. The smell of grease and beans still hung in the air, stubborn and unchanging, like the town itself. Food had become ritual, Open a tin, scoop out the beans, toss in a chunk of salt pork if you were lucky. Drink the black coffee. Repeat. It was predictable, safe. And yet, in that predictability lay the faintest comfort. But not everyone had comfort. Some wandered from saloon to saloon, chasing rumors of jobs, luck, or leftover scraps. Their hunger was sharper, fiercer, not just for food, but for survival, for the faintest taste of warmth and light in a world that offered so little. Boarding houses offered brief reprieve. A stew simmered slowly, thick and savory, bread warm from the oven. For an hour or two, life felt slightly easier, but the bills had to be paid, and the desert didn't forgive. Once the coins ran out, the doors closed, and the harsh rhythm of survival resumed. Even the strongest cowboys, the toughest miners, the fastest gunmen, all depended on the same simple staples: beans, meat, bread, coffee. That was the sustenance of the Wild West. Harsh, repetitive, unremarkable. But it kept them alive long enough to see another sunrise. And that's the truth about Tombstone in the 1800s. Life was not glamorous. Food was not luxurious. Every meal, every bite was calculated, necessary, and fleeting. Behind the gunfights, behind the legends, the reality was simple: eat or fade away into dust. So as the lamps flickered, the coffee cooled, and the last crumbs of bread were gone, the settlers prepared themselves for the next day. Another sunrise, another fight, another meal, just enough to survive. In Tombstone, survival wasn't a choice, it was a way of life, and the story of what people ate continues. Some settlers rose before the sun, stoking fires to prepare the day's first meal: a pot of beans, a slab of salt pork, some hard bread. It was routine, the same as yesterday, and the same as the day before. Yet, in that repetition, there was discipline. There was survival. In the boarding houses, the smell of stew simmering over a cast-iron stove brought people together. Long tables lined the room, strangers sitting side by side, sharing whatever scraps or portions could be mustered. Conversation was quiet. Survival had a way of keeping people solemn. Even children knew the rules. Eat what is given. Save what you can, and never waste. There was no abundance here. Every morsel counted. Every bite was precious. Outside, the town of Tombstone buzzed quietly. Horses stirred in their corrals. Merchants opened their doors. Miners trudged off to the silver veins. And cowboys made their way to saloons, not for the food, but for the briefest sense of company, a break from the isolation that defined life in the desert. Meals were not celebrations, they were necessities. Beans boiled until soft, salted pork fried until crispy, bread torn and dipped in coffee to soften it. For those lucky enough to afford a boarding house meal, stew with potatoes, onions, and sometimes a rare piece of meat offered comfort, warmth, and a fleeting taste of normalcy. The coffee, strong, black, bitter, was the only constant. It fueled long days, rough nights, and kept the weary awake. Men drank it without pleasure, but with purpose. Each cup was a small victory over exhaustion and hunger. Evenings brought another challenge. Leftover food had to be stored carefully. Salt pork could last, beans could be reheated, bread became hardtack if kept too long. Improper storage meant waste, and in a place like Tombstone, waste could be deadly. Settlers understood the rhythm of survival. Every day was a negotiation between scarcity and necessity. Food dictated life more than comfort, more than luxury, more than choice. And yet, there was resilience. There was adaptation. People learned to make do, to survive, to take comfort where they could. It was a hard life, brutal at times, but it was life nonetheless. In Tombstone, Every meal told a story of struggle, of persistence, of human endurance in the face of the harshest conditions. Because in the Wild West, eating was not about enjoyment. Eating was about living. And that made every